We are just about ready to get started this afternoon. I see some more cars pulling in, so they will join us in progress. Want to again welcome you to Addilynn Memorial United Methodist Church. This has been a great weekend, and yesterday we were equipped in so many ways, and I think our eyes were open to so much opportunity for us. And today we take that to the next level. I think with all my heart that God created us to need each other. And I think the way that we are strong through tough times is by staying together and working together. I know a lot of times we carry around burdens in our lives, and it's the weight of the world on our shoulder, and it's hard for us to ask for help and to lean onto others. And churches kind of have that same mindset. And Missional Hubs and the way that we are connectional people, it fights against that urge to feel like we are on it or in it by ourselves. And God created us with a group of people, a group of churches to serve these communities and be strong as we possibly can. And sometimes that means working together. And the best things that we do are when we work together. So I think you're going to understand that a whole lot more clearer and deeper this afternoon as we gather together. If you're sitting... You're supposed to be sitting with your missional hubs, and it looks like most everyone is. If you're by yourself, then find a hub to connect with, and so you're not by yourself. That kind of defeats the purpose. So we'll find a place to belong, and we'll open with prayer, and then we'll turn it over to Kotan as she leads us this afternoon. Let's pray together. Heavenly Father, we thank you again for bringing us here together to learn and to grow, and help us to work together and do your work in the kingdom. May we be faithful always in what you've put before us and what you've called us to do. We ask that you bless our speaker today, Lord, that you give her the words that just stir our hearts and encourage and teach and hold us accountable, Lord, so that we can be faithful always in what you've called us to do. Bless our churches, we pray, and Lord, help us through these days to be a light shining your honor and glory always. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Good afternoon. I think that some of you are new faces today and some of you are returning. So thank you to those that were brave enough to return after you drank from a fire hose yesterday. And evidently we're still a little bit thirsty. And thank you for those of you that are new to the gathering today. Appreciate you being here. Some of you were nervous when you saw that I was carrying around the Book of Discipline, but it's okay, I promise. It will be all right. We're going to talk about missional hubs today. I understand that this is something that has been of great worth to you all and value, but you all want to strengthen those as well. Is that true? Yes? Did y'all take your naps before you came? I hope you didn't. Did y'all have carbs for lunch or? No, you didn't get your naps. Darn, I didn't either, right? So here's what we're going to do today. This is truly even more working than yesterday. We're going to talk about how to connect first as churches, right? We're not going to be able to do missional hub work unless we connect first as churches. And then we're going to be able to talk about how do we discern a shared vision together. We're not going to be able to move forward until we have some sort of shared vision as a missional hub and what that looks like. Then from there, how to create a shared ministry together as a missional hub, and then evaluating the effectiveness of that shared vision and ministry. We'll talk about how to do that. And then create next steps for your missional hub. So you'll have an action plan when you leave here today. And then we'll talk a little bit about a cooperative parish, how they're kind of the same and different from missional hubs. So we're going to buzz through all of that in 2 hours. And I promise you that it will be 2 hours or less because I have a flight tonight. So there will be no going over, right? All right, so this is what my understanding of your missional hub definition is off of your conference website. Does this look familiar? I hope. It says, missional hubs are a place where our churches connect, birth, and nurture mission ideas and engage in relationship building ministries for the transformation of the community and the world. Now, would you all have been able to recite that prior to coming in here today? Now, you said you weren't going to sit up front again. That's right, right? Do you think your church members would know that that's a missional hub definition? How many lay people do we have in the room? 4, 5. I think our pastors know. Okay, all right. So I wanted to share with you, I've been working on the latest book that's going to be out in a couple of months, and it's about cooperative parishes, because I think there's a renewed interest in cooperative parishes. And so I was, when I was a developer, a congregational developer in a conference, anytime any staff or their directors would come down the hallway and I'd have my book of discipline out on my desk, they go, oh, we're getting nervous. What is she trying to work around now? I promise that's not what this is about. But in paragraph 121, I found this really interesting. And I want to share this with you. And it's the beginning of this sentence that I think is really important. It says, whenever United Methodism has had a clear sense of mission, God has used our church to save persons, heal relationships, transform social structures, and spread scriptural holiness, thereby changing the world. In order to be truly alive, we embrace Jesus' mandate to love God and to love our neighbor and to make disciples of all peoples. But do you hear how it starts out? Whenever United Methodism has had a clear sense of mission. Do we have a clear sense of mission? I know when I go into churches and do consulting, so often when I ask the question of the congregation, what's our purpose? Sometimes there's crickets. What's the best thing about our church? What's the most common answer? Friendly. The people. And when they say the people, what do they mean?
I think they mean the people, how they were treated, how they were welcomed, how the people seemed to, and how much family is in the church.
Correct. And it's the people usually that are already gathered, right? Usually we don't have any conversation or any focus about the community beyond the walls of the church, right? So there's this missing understanding of who we are and what we're called to do as the church. And I think we lost that a long time ago, right? And so I think there's a connection here when our congregants don't understand why we're here. And that's why we don't have this sense of purpose and we don't connect with the mission field and the people beyond our walls. That's why we're not doing the rest of the work, because we don't have that clear sense of mission. Does that make sense? Right. All the rest of the things, and that's why we're so frustrated. And as we talked about yesterday, those that are not so into us anymore, right? Those are the ones that weren't as committed. It's your core group of committed people that probably do get this more are the ones that are around. They're your more mature disciples that are here that are probably going to get this more than ever. But what's the most important things you want them to do? And what are we going to be willing, courageous enough to let go of so that we can do these things that are the most important? Missionally focused. Now, I think here's the other thing. We use the word outreach a lot. I think it's because we're afraid of the E word. okay? When we say outreach, if you were to ask your congregants what that means, what do you think they would say? And I say, does it mean mission service? Or does it mean evangelism? Because those are two separate things. Because we used to have those as separate ministry teams, but we became afraid of evangelism, the word, the team. And so therefore, we just decided to call it outreach. We felt like that was more PC, if you will. So now there's an understanding of, well, we understand what that means, but I don't think we have a clear understanding of maybe who is serving on that team, that they have a clear understanding of the expectation. Does that make sense? Because then you say, well, what do you do as this committee or this team? And most of the time, it's transactional service. So what, in essence then, friends, we've lost the whole evangelism arm, right? So when we say missional hubs, what does that mean? What does that mean? Is it evangelism? Is it service? Is it both? That's part of, I think, the discernment that maybe some of you all want to go through when you're really trying to figure out what are you called to do together. And even some of the terminology, I think sometimes we have to unpack and define. Remember the exercise that we even went through yesterday about VBS? We think we all like, okay, let's do VBS, and we just go for it. But what are we trying to accomplish with VBS? We would implement that differently. The same with missional hubs. What are we trying to accomplish? And then we use our churchy words that mean different things to different people. And sometimes we have made it so that it's easier to digest words. And then we have made it so that people don't understand what it is that they're expected to do or what we're wanting them to do. Does that make sense? All right, so I just kind of wanted to unpack that even before we got started. So, yeah.
Tell me, when you have a missional hub, I think it sounds very exciting.
Mm-hmm.
But does that mean then the individual churches kind of give up their missions and just work with the hub?
No. You do both. You do both. Now, but that's what, in my understanding and explanation, that's the difference of cooperative parish and missional hubs. Missional hubs have a bit of shared ministry. Cooperative parishes is they pretty much do everything together, right? But as we're going to get to at the end of our time, there's 7 different models of cooperative parishes. 7 different models. Did y'all know that? Another little peruse through the Book of Discipline will tell us that, okay? This is another question of that is on your website. What makes your heart burst? What makes our heart burst? Now, I would call that probably part of the passion piece. But the thing is, here's what happens a lot of times with our churches. A leader has this kind of moment. A leader has this kind of ministry calling. But do we have that kind of shared heart moment as a church to share that ministry or as a missional hub? Because if we don't share that, then we're going to have trouble keeping the momentum. Does that make sense? Again, something else that happens when I do consultations is we ask for, tell us about the ministries that you do in the community. Okay, what kind of community connections do you have? And sometimes you would have like 2 pages of these lists, and it's like, there is no way But when you dig into it, do you know what that meant? One person in the church kind of did that on their own. That's great. But we have a misunderstanding of what we go and do as individual disciples and then what we do as a part of the church, right? And it's both and. And then how do we release disciples to go and do their thing, but not, and let that be okay, and not feel like we have to fund everything that individuals come up with, or that we have to go with everything that one person comes up with. But how is it shared, right? Those are two separate things. Because again, we have to be really smart and use our resources the most effectively, because most churches are spread too thin. We need to be doing less things much more effectively than doing too many things too shallow. And I don't mean that negatively, it's just we can't do them deep and relationally and well with follow-up, because the deeper we can go with more steps and more relationally, the more effective they're going to be, rather than, I call them one-hit wonders, right, where we don't have the opportunity to follow up. And then we're frustrated and we're burning people out, and then we're frustrated because we don't have enough volunteers. Unless you all just have all the volunteers you need, then why are we here, right? Anybody have that problem? I don't think so. All right, so step one. The very first thing we need to do is, how are we building relationships as churches, right? So how are you bringing your churches together to start building relationships? What's the common ground together? Start sharing stories about shared ministry. What ministries have been some of the favorite things that they've done? What are their ways that they've done ministry that they feel like has had the biggest impact in lives in their community, right? Maybe do some shared sort of studies together. And in particular, studies that are teaching them outward focus. So not just a Bible study you pull off the shelf, but an evangelism type of study, if you will, right? And then what are the shared giftedness that would rise up, or spiritual gifts, or secular gifts that rise up from these congregations that begin to build a theme or a common thread? I worked with one particular church, and they were full of engineers. I worked with another church, and they seemed to have educators, right? There's just this unique gathering of people that ends up with unique giftedness. So when you pull a group of churches together, what are some of these common experiences, common gifts, and common secular skills that begin to bubble up? Then let them start dreaming together. What is God calling them to do together that they couldn't do separately? This is where hope can be birthed. Because in our little worlds of being in our cocoons over the last 2 years, people have felt secluded and hopeless. But when we bring people together, there's a whole lot of hope that can be birthed out of that. There's a lot of depressed people and a lot of depressed churches out there. But if we can inspire and begin to dream about what is possible instead of what we've left behind, because there's a whole lot of wanting to go back. So how can we point people to the future instead? How can we begin to talk about the hopefulness and the abundance of our Lord and Savior? Because, friends, we have talked way too much about our losses. So inspire our friends to begin to dream together about what God is calling us to do into the future. What can we do together? Okay? And then study together, right? So you cannot do this alone, pastors. The majority of you in this room are pastors. You need your laity around you. So the missional hubs are made up of pastors and laity together working. That they first have to have a relationship. They have to come to know each other, break bread together, get to know one another, and begin to dream with one another. All right? So, here is your first time in your missional hubs. I want you to spend some time beginning to think about what are your first 3 steps in bringing your churches together to start this relationship building. So are you in your hubs where you can kind of turn to one another? Anybody need to move around any? Everybody have a missional hub leader? Missional hub leader, you're gonna carry the conversation and take notes. Everybody know who that is? Everybody have a hub. Anybody not have a hub? Raise your hand. Okay, I'm gonna give you about 7 minutes. 3 steps, go. You have 3 minutes. Time is up. All right, just give me one step from each hub. All right? What's your one step here? What's one of your 3 steps you all came up with? Just to share with the rest.
One of the steps that we came up is newsletter. We're working on a newsletter to update the information through video and through written form.
Okay? So their one step to begin to build relationship is a shared newsletter with the Missional Hub.
For information for all churches to know what's going on.
And they're already, some of these are meeting together on a
Yeah.
regular basis.
Awesome. And we have 2 back here. What's your one of your first steps?
We thought it more leaning into lady involvement and then building relationships there, because even in the missional hubs I've experienced, there are pastors I barely know, and certainly lay people I don't know.
Yep.
Get involved. So working in those relationships to have some shared
Yep.
ground.
So what's the first thing you're going to do to start that?
Find out more about the missional hub that we belong to.
Okay.
I'm new at the church, so.
Okay, got it, got it. Okay, are you with them? Or you hit them? Okay, what's your all's first step?
Well, I think our first step was talking, get back, we know each other, but we haven't really seen each other as much, so.
Okay.
Just getting that relationship, I think that's the first part of this.
Okay,
Pastors to get together and do some, then start bringing in more other people.
okay.
It sounds like a cop-out, but COVID has affected so much.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I like to think I'm developing
And the other thing is that it's beginning to be springtime, and to be able to gather outside in light of all of that, that's to our advantage at this point too. Now, are you with them, Mr. Trouble?
I'm just along for the ride.
Is that right? You're welcome.
Thank you for spurring it on.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And how about you? What did your hub come up with for one of the first steps? Oh, she's in charge. I saw you standing up, so it just looked like you were in charge. So I was in. Oh, okay. Okay, all right. Go for it then.
We were talking about, we share, well, in a couple of ways, different ways, we share some things in our communities, like, we have weekday religious education in Virginia, and we split it between their end and our end. They kind of have their own separate group, and we have our own separate group, we come together and share it. And so we kind of have a commonality, like their elementary school and our elementary school feeds into the same middle school, so just kind of making that connection with the students and stuff. And using that as a basis to connect.
Wow. I love it that we're starting with students. What a great idea. Okay, awesome. All right, Ray? Okay, all right.
Ray stood up, but, that's just Ray. Unfortunately, in our hub, and fortunately, we have a cooperative parish
Okay,
within our hub, so
Okay.
that makes it a little bit difficult. So there were some people that didn't really understand the hub concept, where there's some that have been doing it for quite some time.
okay,
So I think one of the first steps that we need to do is break bread together. We said, that was one of the things that to get to know each other better. We do have Lenten lunches that have been successful, but they're during the day. So that doesn't leave an opportunity for those that work to do anything. So, that might be an avenue that we do, is something in the evening with all of our churches.
awesome.
Is that okay? You want to add anything? No. No? She said a progressive dinner.
Have a progressive dinner with the new.
That would be great.
There you go.
It's kind of wed to their buildings.
Right. Good idea. Good idea. Great. And it's pastors and laity together doing that?
Within
The progressive dinner?
yes.
Awesome.
Love to get
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah. Who doesn't love a progressive dinner, right? Okay. So maybe y'all got some ideas from some others as well. So I hope you're taking notes so that you're going to come out with a really great action plan from this. All right. So let's go on to step 2. Discerning a shared vision, right? Because otherwise we're just going to be hopping from one thing to another. So vision needs to come before strategies. We as a church are so great at jumping right into strategies. We get a bee in our bonnet and go, hey, let's go do this. And we do it, right? We're about implementers, and we jump before we plan sometimes. So what are the gifts, shared gifts, that kind of bubble to the top as you begin to build relationships with the missional hubs, right, of the congregants and you as leaders, that bubble to the top? Then, what is the leaders, and by leaders I mean you as clergy and leaders of the church, your purpose and passions? Okay, because when people are driven by purpose and passions, it's going to be sustainable. Okay, but if all we have is passions, but we don't have giftedness and buy-in from others, it's not going to be sustainable either, right? So they're companions. But then what we have to make sure is that we have the community voice layered into this as well. And by community voice, what I'm saying is, how are we impacting the community in a positive way? And this is, what need are we meeting? What opportunity is there that we are helping with? What problem are we solving? And this is the impact area of the area that the missional hub covers. Okay, or a particular area that you as the missional hub say, okay, this particular issue, problem, opportunity, we agree that that is the most pressing issue that we are all going to work cooperatively, collaboratively with. Or we think that we have the resourcing, and by resource, it's about time and energy more than anything else at this point, capacity, to say we can do more than one. Follow me? Because this is why we do things together as opposed to everybody doing their own thing. We probably wouldn't be doing missional hubs if we felt like everybody could do their own thing really effectively and well and have the same sort of impact. But we feel like we can do better together. That's the whole idea. So as we come together, what's that impact that we want to share together? Is that one or two things? But it's not 5 or 10, I can tell you that, right? But this shared vision is the intersection of this gifts, passion, and the community voice. I think there was a hand that went up. Yeah.
I was on the community voice. Should we have people from the community, like leaders, come in and talk to these?
No, we go out.
Before we make,
Yeah.
when we try to come up with a need, should we be advisable to have someone from the community come in and say, or just
No.
not yet?
No, we don't ask them to come in. We go out, right? And so we have to have a dispatched movement. Do we hear a theme over the weekend? Dispatched movement, okay? And we're going to send a variety of people out, clergy and lay, and have conversations with community leaders and neighbors. And you want a shared group of questions that are common, that everyone's asking, right? Because you're looking for themes. You're looking for common threads. And you're asking, what are the greatest needs? Again, however you're going to phrase that question. What are the greatest needs of the community? Or what is the problem that needs to be solved? Okay, because so often we assume, right? And I think we really also need to be asking the follow-up question, and who is already working on that? Because I think sometimes it's a big need, but there's already 3, 4, 5 different groups that are working on it. And then everybody's going after the same problem, and there's another problem over here, and maybe it's not as big, but nobody's working on it, right? And then the other thing that, remember we talked about yesterday, is peel back that onion and say, okay, so if it was, we'll go back to the example. Remember we were talking about the school counselor yesterday? The child that, we need socks. We keep having kids show up with no socks at school. And so rather than say, okay, all right, we're going to do a sock drive because that's what we do. And that's not a bad thing. So why do you think we have a bunch of students showing up with no socks? What's the underlying thing that could be going on? So the resulting conversation ends up being that there's usually a need for financial peace. There's budgeting things that would be helpful, or maybe these families are having trouble finding jobs, so maybe they need help with resumes and job interviews, maybe clothing to wear to go to job interviews. So you get to the point of how can we relationally help rather than just donating stuff. Because until we have the opportunity to be in relationship with people, how are we ever going to get the opportunity to possibly share our faith? Because that's what makes us different than any other group. Because ultimately, what are we about? Making disciples, right? Right? And if all we ever do is transactional, we will never have the opportunity to share our faith. Now, please don't hear me say We should never do any of the transactional and only do relational. We need to do both and. But let me tell you, we tip the scales way too far in transactional. Way too far. We write a lot of checks and we donate a lot of stuff. And that does some good things. But I think it's a cop-out a lot of times because that's what's easy and comfortable. So we need to do a lot more of the other to balance out. And we're going to have to help people with those kinds of conversations. Even going out, I get ready to do a consultation the end of April, and the pastor sent me the consultation packet earlier this week, and he's like, I'm embarrassed. When they went out to do these community interviews, he said, my team was all over it. But he said when it got right down to it, they were a little timid. I was working with the Baltimore-Washington Conference in the Catalyst, and that was one of the main things. It was a foundational. We called them the one-on-one, these conversations. How are we going to become culturally competent and build relationships with unchurched if we're not willing to have those one-on-ones? And we asked them to have one of those every week as part of this program, and they knew it going in. And that was one of the main things that they all had trouble doing. Pastors and laity alike, right? We lost that. Go back to, we watered down evangelism with the term outreach, right? So when we go to this piece of trying to have shared vision, we can't do that without being in relationship with the community leaders and truly know what's going on in the community if we're not out there being a part of it. And we can't do that with one conversation. It has to be multiple conversations in each of the mission fields that are in this missional hub to figure out what's the common thing that's going on that we want to share together in the ministry, right? Somebody had a question somewhere. I saw a hand go up. Yeah.
Powerful image I've ever experienced of when we donate too much stuff, or we get into that. I was in the sort of Gatlinburg area when they had the fire there, and they actually had to get volunteers in warehouses to receive the stuff that was pouring in, and there was more energy that had to be put into that took away from the rebuilding, the more sort of long-term. So, but I mean, it was just absolutely, it almost made you sick at your stomach that most of the volunteers were needed to sort through the really junk.
Yeah, exactly. Great example. All right, so get back into your hubs. I want you to begin to think about what are the first 3 steps needed for discerning a shared vision for the churches in your missional hub. All right, 7 minutes, go.
two cooperative parishes, really three cooperative parishes that are within hubs. And the hubs meet together monthly and are already, this cooperative parish
Yep.
was dysfunctional.
Okay.
And
What?
it's because they try to do strategy before shared vision.
Ah, okay. And have they realized that at this point, or?
I think so.
Okay.
There's tension.
Okay, okay. I was watching dynamics and was trying to figure out what was going on. So, okay. I just saw eye rolling, but I wasn't quite sure what was
The
about.
best one is the one that Carol spoke
Okay,
for.
okay, okay,
And she's in a parish as well as a hub.
okay.
But they do the best one.
Wow, okay.
So I don't know.
Good.
Yeah. We're about the only district in the conference that's even still campus.
And
Everybody else gave it up.
so they're just doing something else, or just not doing?
And they say it hasn't been successful.
Did it fall apart because of COVID, or it was before then?
It was probably, it just never got off the ground.
Okay.
Some people bought it and some didn't. And we have two leaders in this district who have driven it.
Yes.
One of them is
That's usually what it
and the
takes.
other is a man.
Okay, the one talking now. Okay. And that they get it.
Yes.
They lead it, they get it, and it becomes grassroots, right?
And it has built community.
Yes, 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 yes,
You
yes.
might be I don't know, they might need some extra.
Okay, okay. All right, you have one more minute on this one. All right, friends. All right, what's your first step? One of your steps that you identified in thinking about going after your shared vision.
Build better relationships.
Okay.
Get to know one another.
Okay.
We kind of don't know, one or two of the preachers we may know a little bit better than the other ones, and due to bivocational and work schedule, we just, physically we're separated, and we're not spending enough quality time to build relationships so that we have an understanding that our vision is simple, but yet reachable.
Okay. So building relationships within the pastors first is kind of step one.
Step one.
And then and within your congregants is step one, right?
Share,
Right.
Share our gifts and our dreams among
Okay.
our individual congregations.
Okay. All right. So so one of those first steps in that visioning is gaining that information about the gifts of the congregation, right? So how would you go about doing that?
Well, that's a good question. That may be a question for you to answer.
I was asking you first.
We do it through meeting with each other, getting to know each other.
Yeah. So
What
so
churches have as
So part of that comes in the relationship, but the other thing is sometimes spiritual gifts inventories will help you with that kind of thing as well. Okay? But through stories, sometimes you're going to get, well, you know, I spent my whole life as a carpenter, you know, kind of stories. But I've also done some things as simple as Survey Monkey, but you can also print them off, by the way. Okay, for those that don't do online, because that's always, but here's the other thing, friends, is use technology to your advantage, even for churches that are have members that don't do it online. And let me tell you how to do this, because it's so much easier when you're trying to pull the report together at the end, instead of trying to do all of this manually, is even if someone will get on the phone with friends from the congregation and ask them the questions, and like they're taking it for them in SurveyMonkey, because it's free, right? SurveyMonkey is free, and they're just checking the boxes. So then when all the information is put together, it tabulates it for you instead of you tabulating it manually after you've done all of this on paper. Does that make sense? So even if your congregation doesn't do things online, use that tool or have someone that can use that tool to help you just process it. Are y'all with me? Okay. But even in SurveyMonkey, you can ask some of those questions around, you know, your gifts or your passions or excitement to get after spiritual gifts and experience and skill set that they've done in the secular world, kind of all in one swoop. Okay. And you can do that pretty darn quickly, especially if someone would get on the phone with folks. And you can do that in probably 15 minutes with each congregant, if you got it set up. Okay? All right? All right. Who's speaking back there? All right.
In terms of developing the mission, it seems as the part of the trick is to find that spot where, as you're talking about, where there's a need that's not being addressed.
Mm-hmm. That you have the gifts, that you, as the Missional Hub, have the gifts and passions to be able to address.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, how do you do that?
Mm-hmm.
We've got a Faith in Action in Addilynn that serves Washington County. They do a wide range of things. But in conversation with the executive director, two things emerged as needs that they are not able to fill, and that nobody else is filling as far as he knows, and I think he would. One was the idea of transitional housing, not a night or two, but like, for example, if a family is marginal and they need housing for 6 months, and they don't really have anything to work with right now, how do we do that? The other thing that he talked about is that Washington County, for people who do not have transportation, there is not reliable transportation for them to go from wherever they are to where the job is available. There's a little place called Bromley Gap. There's nothing there in terms of employment. They have to get to Addilynn to work or London. There's a bus, but it only runs 2 days a week. You'll do good there.
So, sounds like there's a need, and do we have people who are passionate about fulfilling that need? Right? So that's the conversations that need to be had. But I think we need to start building the relationship before we put that behind it, right? We got to do step 1 before we do step 2. Because too often we try to do that second step before we've built the relationships first. And just because the pastors have built the relationship does not give us the sustainability until we have the congregational relationships as well. Right? Okay? Yeah.
Relationship, are you talking among the people to decide to do it, or are you talking about with the people in the church?
The congregations that are going to be providing whatever it is we're going to do. Yeah. The faith community that's going to be behind this. Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. Are you speaking for the group?
I don't know, I think we got off on, I mean, we talked about building relationships and some conversations, that's pretty much, I think what we talked about.
Okay.
We got a little bit confused.
That's all right. Okay. Oh.
I didn't stand up this time.
Guess you'll stand up next time then if you don't have to speak, okay? So what did you all come up with?
Well, it's about knowing our strengths and matching the strengths up with the needs, in the common need in the community, and how we can pull our talents and our resources and our treasure together to meet those, accomplish that common goal.
Yep.
Vision.
So what's your first step?
What's our first step?
Yep.
Is prayer. Yeah.
Is there an echo behind you? Am I hearing?
There's a lot of wisdom.
Oh, is that what they call that?
It's the first step would be a common passion amongst our churches, and I think we have that. Our next step would be implementing that. It's with the homelessness in
Okay.
Bristol, Virginia, and Tennessee.
Okay. How do we know that?
It's all we talk about. Yeah. On the front page of
Well, I know that.
On the front page of the paper this morning, there's a story about
Right.
Proverbs 3:21 Ministries right here.
Right.
And the pictures on there talking about
Yep.
the steps that
Right.
churches are taking to
Right.
make a dent in that problem.
Right. And so I get her church
Yeah.
and their passion. And how many others are in that hub? How many other churches? How many other churches are in your hub? Okay. 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 To the point that they would want to adopt that as the Missional Hub ministry.
It's a rallying cry that we all can easily get behind and support. And
Okay.
everybody wants to support.
Okay. So do we have number one yet? Do we have the relationships in number one? In this group, what do you mean by that?
With some, there's some that are coming along. But
Okay.
we've been doing this for several years.
Okay. So when you say in this group, are we talking clergy?
Yeah.
Okay. So in number one, do we have the congregations brought along yet?
Yes.
Okay. To widespread? That was.
It could be deeper.
Okay. 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 So.
Or at least some of us that have never even talked about it.
Okay.
I mean, and I don't think we will have trouble.
Yeah.
But that's where we're coming from, is we have this one wonderful group, and then we have another group that hasn't ever really done it.
Right.
And we're gonna have to build the relationship with each other
Right.
before we can ever begin to really, we can have volunteers, but we need to have people whose hearts are there.
Yep. Right. So go.
Thing that been going through my mind when we started this whole journey is, we have our hub. We've got 4 churches, and our 4 pastors are here today.
Mm-hmm.
And we have got a real good bond between the 4 churches. But Pastor Laura and I were talking, and I used to work for the city, and I was in the engineering department. The U.S. Department of something or other would come in and they want this and this and this. So I prepared for it. And another few months there was another one come in, they wanted the same thing. And before the year was up, I had to do a triplicate. So I just started building triplicate and handed it out to them when they come in. Why, or how far reaching should we be? Should we just be us wonderful Methodists, or should we talk to the Presbyterians or the Baptists? How much involved can we do that so that the trailers in Katrina aren't full of stuff that people don't want? It's wasted effort, wasted energy, and wasted resources when we don't have some coordination. How far or how deep do you think we should take something like that?
Well, this is why we want to do it relationally, much more so than transactionally. Okay, so that we don't have just stuff stockpiling in warehouses. Okay, because it's about transformation. It isn't about giving stuff away. more so than anything. And so I don't know that you can have too much relationship, too much impact, too much transformation. When
Never done anything like this before, and I have the passion to want to do it, and I occasionally have enough energy to do it. So if we
Yeah.
can benefit the most people and spread, I believe by this thing for years is many hands make light work.
Mm-hmm.
So when we've got many people having their own tasks, we could get so much more done.
Absolutely.
And we're not competing with each other.
Absolutely. So
We
when
don't care what the other does as long as the mission's accomplished.
correct, yeah, right. So when you have 70% of any given mission field on average that is unchurched, I think it's going to be a long time before we get relationally to the point that we overwhelm the system. Right? So going back to the relational piece, right? I hear you all feel that there's a whole lot that is already going on. And all of you are at different stages of development of your missional hubs. I hear that loud and clear. And it's okay. Wherever you are, we're just trying to figure out what's the next step and to have a pathway for you to kind of know how to develop it, okay? So don't feel like you're ahead or behind or whatever. We're just trying to build a pathway so that you know what those steps are, okay? First and foremost. So, and some of us just felt like we did what we knew or felt like was the next step. Some of it kind of happened organically, and it started in one church, and another church kind of came on, and another church, and we got kind of passionate about it, but then there's a missional hub that wants to come in around it. So what we don't want to do, though, is get too far ahead of ourselves without coming back and go, are all of the steps complete before we take the next one? And that's what I think I hear you saying is, it feels like maybe we need to do a little more groundwork in one. Maybe we've done a whole lot there, but maybe there's some other opportunity that if maybe we do a little bit more plowing in that step one, that we're going to have a better harvest when we get to step 4. Does that make sense to you all? Because while there's a whole lot to buy in and excitement, if we go back and maybe do a little bit more communication and a little bit more bringing folks along, that it's going to even be more fruitful in the end. Okay? Did we have one more group? Yes. Well, you didn't get by with it this time. I'm really sorry. Okay.
And it's in Southwest Virginia, and Southwest Virginia is Southwest Virginia.
Sure. 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 Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So here's where I want us to caution ourselves. So we were talking steps today. Did you hear we're wanting to already name vision? We're already wanting to name the ministry. I just wanted you to name steps. We want to step ahead and get to the answer rather than plan the steps. Okay? And so what I was looking for is, okay, we need to, how are we going to gather the information about the giftedness of our congregation? How are we going to gather the passions of the leadership? How are we going to dispatch the movement to figure out the community needs, or however you're going to pose that question around opportunity or problem we're going to solve? How are we going to complete the steps as opposed to get to the answer that those steps are going to get to? Do y'all hear it? Because we so much want to get to the end and start executing. And then we don't have all the complete information to actually do the visioning well. Because the vision is birthed from those three pieces. The vision is the intersection of the passions of the leaders, the gifts of the congregation, and that problem or need of the community. Okay? It's not what we want to do, it's what God is calling us to do with the Venn diagram of those three things that you collect and that we pray over. Right? So don't be tempted to go to the solution because that's what we think is going to be the answer. Go through the steps. And go through the steps with clergy and laity alike, with all of the folks from your missional hub. Okay? I know it's a big temptation just to want to get there. I get it. Okay, so then when we have the shared vision, right? Then it's what is the shared ministry, activity, event, or service that aligns to that vision. You see, this is step 3, not step 1. This is normally where we start because someone got excited. This is where their heart breaks, or they got excited about something, or they went to some meeting and heard about it and went, oh, that sounds really great, let's do it. But it's birthed out of the vision that came from all of those conversations around passions, gifts, and community need. And I hope if you've heard nothing else this weekend, please go deep, not wide. Do it well. Do it relationally. Do one thing after another with the same folks, time and time and time again. Right? So, any of you been married? Any of you married? Okay. So, did you get married on your first date together? Took 3 months? Okay. Okay. Who else is married? Okay. How long before your first date in marriage? A few years? Okay, so we got 3 months, a few years. Who else is married? Okay, how about for you? None. So you were married on your first date?
Basically, yeah. We had been very, very good friends. Our parents were very good friends, and we decided to get married. And that was 55 years ago.
Okay. All right. Okay. I saw a hand over here. How long? Okay, just Cliff Notes. I have a flight. Come on.
We dated my senior year of seminary. We broke up. We're apart 15 years. Got together again 15 years later, and we were married 6 months.
Okay. All right. 6 months, kind of. Okay. All right. How long? 4 years. Okay. All right. Everybody's story is different. Right? So, building relationships so that you might get the honor and privilege of sharing your faith is going to be different with every relationship. So to think that we're going to get the opportunity to invite someone to church or to share our church, to share our faith story on the very first encounter relationally, we know that the probability of that is 1 in 50, at least, probably 1 in 1,000, right? And so we meet them once, and if we never meet them again, and we're going to meet somebody else the next week and somebody else the next week, maybe 1 in 1,000, we might get to share our faith the first time. But if we're in relationship with the same person over and over again, because we're going to go deep with people, then the chances of being able to share our faith eventually, because we're going to build trust. And they're going to get to the point where they're curious or they're open to hearing our faith story, is much more likely. Friends, that's why we go deep. That's why we go relational instead of transactional, right? So, the other thing is, there are times when we do a whole bunch of great things where we gather them up, whether it's blankets or mittens or coats or green beans or cereal or rice or toilet paper or whatever the case may be, right? And sometimes it does some good. But most of the time, people have no idea where it came from or why people even did it. For all they know, it came from Uncle Sam. And again, it's met a need, and there's nothing wrong with that. But we exist for a different purpose than other charities. And I think we kind of forget that sometimes. It's about the impact and transformation. And so when we are discerning what it is that we're going to do, whether it's in your individual churches or when it's in your missional hub, I want you to deeply pray about and discern this impact. I call it the eyeball to eyeball, belly to belly kind of work in the most safe sanctuary kind of ways. But friends, we have avoided this for way too long. And this is part of the reason we're in the situation that we're in, if we're just going to be really honest with one another. So this is our opportunity to regain some of the whole reason that we exist as Christians and as a denomination, is impact and transformation. So while you have steps to get to before you get to this step, I want you to think through, when you get here, what are some of the first things you want to think about of those first steps when you're going to discern your ministry after you have your shared vision? So I want you to spend a few minutes in your hub thinking about those steps. All right, we're going to start in the back this time. What's your step?
First off, you have to identify the vision. You can't do anything without identifying the vision.
Yep.
Then you've got to find the talents to head the vision. Now, once you figure out what resources and who's heading up that vision, then you go and you execute the vision. So without first identifying and then putting somebody in place, we all want to jump to do, but we have nobody to head it up, so we're all the term chicken with their heads cut off, running around trying to make it happen. You've got to have leadership, and it doesn't
Yeah.
have to be a pastor.
Do you want to say that again?
I think sometimes in the churches that I serve, sometimes they want to do, but they feel like they have to yield to myself and I. If they want to do, they come to me. Trust me, it ain't hurting my feelings.
So what happens when a pastor leads it and then, some DS named Jane comes along and pulls you out and changes the appointment? What happens?
Well, we just talked about that here. Not about Jane. About the Missional Hubs. They break up.
Correct.
If it's only pastors doing it, then if a pastor leaves, which our hub is facing, then we just start back over with our vision because we have another pastor coming in and might not share our vision.
Do you remember yesterday we talked about pastor-centric churches? Do not become pastor-centric hubs, or the same thing's going to happen. Or if we have a pastor-centric hub that has a pastor-centric driven ministry focus, because what's going to happen then is if we have an appointment change, right? So go back to step one. That's why the step one, friends, is so important, is that the congregations have this shared relationship. Their gifts and their passions are a part of this discernment and commitment to it. And so even as there are different appointments made, the sustainability is there because it's the laity's ministry just as much as it is the clergy's ministry. There is this shared ministry thing that goes with our connectionalism, right? We have to remember that. That's what's going to be the sustainability. But at the same time, we have to continue to understand that we have to continue to evaluate, which is our next step. Just because this is the ministry that our hub is going to do now does not mean that it's going to be in stone and we're going to do that for eternity. It may need to shift from time to time. Right? Okay? Thank you. Who's speaking this time?
I was in a different conversation.
And they're getting rowdy at the end here. Okay, so just one of you talk about next step then. Oh, and now we have a fourth one. Yeah.
Make sure that you are on message repeatedly.
Yeah. Yep.
And that you trust people.
And they trust you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And is there ever such a thing as over communication, really, too? Right? Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. That's a great point. Great point. What?
We kind of talked about the matching process, the matching of the needs and the gifts and the resources and so forth, and
Yeah.
kind of how to do that and stuff.
Yeah. And it's the same process that you do in a church that you do in a hub. Y'all realize that, right? I assume y'all. I just wanted to make it obvious. Okay, back here.
I think we talked a lot about communication. It's communicating to our people as we're talking about stuff. It's often we talked about one of the things we both ran into is somebody else will credit when you do something. One pastor or one church wants credit, and they won't get involved if they're not the ones. And so you ran into that communication. If you've already had the first two things about who you hear, it should be about communicating what that vision is to as many
And I think that goes back, right, right. And I think that goes back to step one. And maybe step one in establishing the relationship, that there might even be, it might even be helpful to think about a missional hub covenant. To understand what it is that we're called to do together, or maybe that's part of your vision together. At some point, there has to be an understanding of what it is we're called to do and how we're going to do our work together. Because if we get all the way to that ministry and we have that happening, something happened along the way that we didn't understand what we were all about, right? If it becomes about credit, we got to go back to step one. We probably shouldn't even launch a ministry if it becomes about who gets credit. Because it's not a healthy ministry if that's what it's about. Right? That's right.
Not about pats on the back.
That's right.
It's about glorifying God, not people.
That's right. Or churches. Right. Yep. Okay. You all back there.
We spent time talking about the commitment of each church, and kind of we're back at what's our shared passions? Is that shared in each church so that it's a shared ministry versus one or two churches saying, hey, let's do this?
Yes. Yes. Because then it's not a missional hub, right? Yeah, absolutely. Okay? What'd you all come up with? Besides Scott. Yep, yep.
We took up all of her time during racial
Well, that's right.
transfers now.
Oh, no.
No,
So,
we talked about trying to be more relational. I think that's what's heavy on our hearts.
Yep.
We've got some good ministry we're supporting through Annette's church and Daniel's church, but we don't feel like we're making the contact with the people. And that's what we're really focusing on. And I think we'll be spending some time on that as a hub, looking at how we can reach individuals and get down to one-on-one instead of trying to do the group thing.
yeah. Do you mind me talking a little bit about it? With the rest? Okay. So they're doing diapers and wipes primarily for single parents, and some of those are raising even maybe grandchildren and great-grandchildren, okay? And they were talking about, they knew that they wanted to go the next step, but they weren't sure what that looked like. And there's always this struggle with, my goodness, you're coming in. She didn't say it this way. This is me talking. But there's always this struggle of, you're coming in to get stuff from us week after week. And we offer prayer. Boy, we'd love to have you come for church, right? That's always what, we even say it sometimes, and that's always our desire. But here's the next step. I even said, that's a leap for them, usually, right? But what's the next baby step? That's what we want. What do they need? So what's their hurt? What's their pain? They're struggling through being a single parent, just getting through day by day. So maybe a support group for being a single parent. And bringing in mentors, maybe some social work, to meet their need as opposed to asking them to do what we feel like we want them to do or need for them to do. Do you hear the difference? Right? In a world that sent people to church and there was an expectation for church, that might have been the next step. But we're in postmodern times that is countercultural and is not usually the next step.
But then that becomes a need.
Correct. But it looks very different, yes, and it's baby steps. Yes. And it doesn't start with Bible study. Again, that's a huge leap. But it could start with a study around a felt need of theirs, right? Doing meals on, 4 meals for $5, or whatever, right? felt need for them.
And relationships build.
Correct. Trust, so that we might be able to share our faith at some point. Okay? It's almost reverse engineering. Okay? Okay? Is that helpful? Okay. And sometimes we need to do this outside the building. A lot of times we need to do it outside the building, friends. Right? And I get it, our buildings are paid for and it's easy to do that, but sometimes there's just baggage to go along with people coming into a church building.
There's a lot more hurt out there than we realize, too.
Correct.
It's happening in church.
Correct. So always keep that in mind too, depending on.
Well, when the pandemic, we were doing it outside the building, we was doing it in the building.
But even church grounds, friends.
But even church grounds, you're talking about just away from the facility.
Yes. And without memorabilia or something that even says we're church. Okay. Approachable, right? Just like you. You know, I dress more like who I'm serving than not. Approachable, right? Okay. So step 4 is evaluating. This scares the church because then we'd have to be honest with one another. Okay? We talked about this a little bit yesterday. Before we ever start a ministry, whether that's an event, a service project, anything that we do, we have to understand what our purpose is. And I know that sounds pretty elementary, but friends, we don't always do this. What does success look like? What does effectiveness look like? What's our intended outcome? Okay? Because if we don't name it, let me tell you that every person that's working this has a different expectation of what that is. Because some will say, no, but whoever's putting it together, I mean, that's, you all have, as a group have to decide this is where we're going. And so they can either be on board or not, right? But as a group, you have to all have a common understanding, right? And they could either be on board or not. But if everybody has a different expectation and outcome, again, we're in trouble because we're all going to be implementing it differently if we're working towards a different outcome. So go back to the diapers and wipes is, okay, are we here to distribute diapers and wipes? Or are we here to support and build relationships with single parents? Those are very different outcomes. What does an effective outcome look like? Does it look, are we just trying to have babies in our community that have diapers? Okay. Exactly. Right? And so, what does that look like? How are we going to measure that? How are we going to know? And this is where it gets a little more difficult, right? Because how do you measure transformation? In what, though? In what?
The whole vision, the babies, the wives. What would be wrong with having these single parents? How about give us a hand this week and work on relationships in that way? Let them feel a part of it.
Okay. So do you?
They can claim it.
Yep. So you all determine what that looks like, but to be on the same page. Some people may say to be a part of a support group for 6 months, or for them to participate in the group for 6 months and begin then to lead a support group.
The overall plan should be measured.
Correct. Because otherwise, how will we know? Right, right, right. ROI, return on investment. And I know that sounds secular, friends, but we're talking about eternal kind of things going on here. This is about stewardship of people's time and energy and capacity, right? And if we're not measuring this, then we're all spinning our wheels. If we want to talk about good stewardship, these are the things we need to be talking about. And I know that people push back on business terms in the church, but I think we need to be talking about more of this because we waste a whole lot of things in the life of the church. If you're asking me, you didn't, but I'm telling you anyway, right? Right? And so if it's an ongoing ministry, then you don't wait till it's over, right? If it's an event, at the end of the event, then you do that evaluation. But if it's an ongoing event, then maybe you need to have quarterly kind of evaluations just to check in and make sure that the barometer, if you will, is moving along. At least you're making progress in it. Okay? Somebody had a question somewhere. Yes?
Not a question, but I certainly believe in the church as a Christian business. I've been a business administrator.
Yep.
And but I'd always thought that it was what you could share with a person and never know the outcome, but you could have made a big impression. I know I used to have to give out the money when people would come to the door, and at first I got really jaded, and then I got to the point I just prayed right before I answered the door, and just God, this is not my money, whatever you need to do it. So there are times that it might be kind of hard to measure.
Yep. Yep. Some we'll know and some we won't. Right? And we plant seeds all over, but we need some sort of measurement of the impact that we can measure. Right?
So there need to be some flexibility in all of that. I mean, as you start to implement, you find things that didn't work.
Always. That's why you have to evaluate, right? It's so that you know what kind of course correction you need to make. And you may get to the point of going, this was a really great idea, and we thought that this was going to work, but it's not working. So we need to completely readjust, or we need to look for another need to be met, because this is not going to be the one that we're going to be able to have any impact with. We're just not making any grounds. And you all have to determine, how long you're going to be in that before you decide. You got to give it long enough, right? But not too long, because sometimes we do it too long in the church because we don't evaluate, or especially when it comes to employees. Right. Everything has an expiration date, right? Everything, ministries, everything has an expiration date, right? And so anytime any one of those things in our Venn diagram, needs of the community, congregational call, kind of community voice, the passions or the gifts shift significantly, then you need to go back and look at that vision again, because you may need to go back to what's your shared vision if any of those things shift. And as a result of that, then maybe the ministry is going to need to shift. Okay? We hold on too long, and then the ministry is no longer effective, especially when we're not evaluating. We don't realize it. Make sense? Okay. So I want to talk just a little bit about cooperative parish. Okay? Now, in working with several conferences, let me just say that everybody has a little different interpretation and implementation of cooperative parishes. Okay? There are 7 different types of cooperative parishes mentioned in the Book of Discipline, starting in paragraph 206. If you just want some Sunday evening reading, you can go look that up. Okay? Now, here's just some kind of overarching themes that I'd just like for you to think about. Cooperative parishes are most effective most impactful when they are started organically and not reactively. They would start with step 1, which means they start relationally. That churches come together. So think about this. A cooperative parish would be the most healthy if it were birthed from a missional hub. Because they've come together and they've seen how much more they can do together as a missional hub and say, man, if we can do this together as a hub, think what we could do together as a cooperative parish when we share even more of our resources together. See, then it's organic. It comes from the congregations up instead of from the top down or from some sort of crisis of leadership, of money, right? So I think this is a wonderful opportunity when we can get really healthy missional hubs that could even take the next step of cooperative parish. And I'm not saying, please, your DS and I are not in cahoots about any of that, right? For sure. But to me, sometimes we put cooperative parishes together that are reactive, and people are resentful because they didn't want it, right? And so it isn't healthy to begin with. And it starts with a discerning process in relationship and discernment. And the discernment goes to, guess what? A shared vision together. So it's almost the same process as a missional hub, but much more extensive because it goes into shared resources. Because we're going to merge, depending on, again, which of the cooperative parish models that you're going to do, usually there's a whole lot more merging of resources together, right? And you can get really creative on the staffing size or the staffing models as well. So in the discernment, okay, now I know this is probably pretty risky, filled with 99% clergy in this room, but through the discernment period, what if it was identified that we need a quarter-time clergy person, a half-time community developer, and a quarter-time senior developer social person, right? That is what that cooperative parish needed, rather than a full-time pastor. Because it came from this organic discernment process through a shared vision. Right, as opposed to we've got a crisis and we got to send in a full-time clergy or three-quarter, or whatever the case may be. Is that making sense? Okay. So, what are the things that we talk about with cooperative parish? Sound familiar? Shared vision, shared ministry, shared resources. And when I say resources, it's not just budget, but it's buildings. We think about the ministry as all the shared facilities, all the shared equipment, all the shared hours in the week, all the shared staff, and by staff, paid and unpaid folks, leadership in general, right? All the gifts, all the passions, all of that. And then there's strategic alignment within the whole parish around all of those things together. So it's not like we have 4 or 5 or 6 or whatever the number is that act independently and we share some few things together, but it's as though, and I'm going to use this term somewhat lightly, but not, it's almost like we become a multi-site because we have this shared vision together. Because we believe that we are better together and we can do more by sharing assets than having separate assets and resources. To me, that's the essence of what the cooperative parish is about. Different than missional hubs. They're independent stations. Okay, now, there's all sorts of different interpretations around that, but if you're going to get the furthest apart, that's where that is from, okay? All right, so next steps. Remember, this is a workshop, so you're going away with homework. Hope you came with that expectation. Okay, so gather your team, and friends, by team, I mean clergy and laity both. Okay? At least one, 2 or 3 would be better as you begin to pull your missional hub together. And this is not going to be a quick process. You're going to probably need to spend the most time in those connecting steps, those relationship building. It's going to take a whole lot of breaking bread around the table together. And you know, it could probably be really fun doing some games together. You know, just Google ice-breaking games. And you all could do that, you know, 2 or 3 times. That could have a whole lot of fun and learn a whole lot about each other. Right? Then once you begin to have those relationships, and you're going to have to get beyond 1 or 2 lay people, right? You're going to have small groups of people in the churches. Then you can begin the visioning steps. And you've got to complete connecting before you get to visioning. You've got to finish visioning all those steps before you get to ministry. Right? Don't get to the strategy before you've done the visioning. Okay? And then always make sure that you have an evaluation process before you ever launch the ministry, because I guarantee you won't do it after the fact. Okay? And I want to leave you with this quote. Nothing will change until you step out in faith and take uncomfortable, challenging action. Step out in faith and take, not comfortable, uncomfortable, and not just action, friends, but challenging action. Nobody ever said this was going to be easy, right? I'm sure you all have heard, if you wanted everybody to like you, you were supposed to sell ice cream, right? Right? Ministry is hard, but there is so much that the world needs. There's so much hurting. The world is looking for hope and encouragement and love and support. And I think the church can do that better than anyone else at this point. Don't you? So I hope you go away this weekend with some encouragement, and that you can spread that to your congregations and inspire them to be great missional hubs and share with the world the hope and the encouragement and the grace and love of Jesus Christ that only the church can do. God bless you, and safe travels home. Thank you so much.
Hey, have safe travels too. She's got a flight out of Knoxville at 7:55 tonight, so pray that she gets through Knoxville traffic and gets there on time. So we thank you so much, Kay, for being with us this weekend and for challenging us to take the first steps or the next steps, wherever we might be. We've got so much work to do ahead of us, and the kingdom is there, and they need to hear that message of faith, hope, and love, and joy. We can share that better together than any other way we can do it. If you didn't get the books yesterday, or if you need some extra copies, Marissa has both in the back, and feel free to take them. They don't do any good sitting on the shelf, so we want them to go. You know, somebody that can benefit from them, please take them a copy. If you want an extra copy, we've got while supplies last. They're free, so take them with you and use them. I'm going to ask Robert Karaoke, if he would, to pray us out as we close.
Once again, thank you say, how majestic is your name in all the earth. Thank you, Lord, because you are the one leading us, and we know that you don't frustrate, O King of glory. We thank you for the leading for this weekend, all that we have gathered, O King of glory, from our teacher. We want to thank you, dear God. We give you all the glory and we praise you, even as we take this to our congregation, to our community, God, around the world. May we continue to do this, knowing that God, you've gone before us. The Holy Spirit is fighting our battle. We are not alone, because Jesus is always with us. We give you all the glory and we praise you. Even as our teacher leaves this place and cuts a flight to our destination, we speak blessings and watch over our King of glory. Each one of us, we are going in that different direction. King of glory, we pray that you watch over us and give us a good one until we meet again. Glory and honor unto you. In the name of Jesus Christ, let us conclude with a prayer that Jesus taught his disciples. Our Father, who art in